The Air Force planes carrying troops and equipment to the Persian Gulf are flying without a device that virtually every commercial airliner has. It's called TCAS, an instrument that helps them avoid mid-air collisions. That has angered this Air Force safety officer enough to fire off letters to the brass. You said, when, not if, when we smack two airplanes together, there will be no excuse and there will be no explanation why we delayed TCAS purchase. And a few days later...
2 days.
2 days later,
yep.
What happened? What happened was a head-on collision between an Air Force transport and a German plane. 33 died.
Suddenly, people started listening now.
Now that there were bodies.
Yes.
I'm Mike Wallace.
I'm Morley Safer.
I'm Ed Bradley.
I'm Steve Croft.
I'm Leslie Stahl. Those stories and Andy Rooney tonight on 60 Minutes. Have you ever looked out the window of an airliner and seen another plane above you or below? If you assume the pilot knows he's there, you're right, he does. And he knows how to steer clear thanks to a high-tech tool on board that helps him avoid a mid-air collision. So why don't military transport planes have it? That's what we'll look at tonight. We've all seen the pictures in recent days. Military transports taking off from U.S. bases loaded down with weapons, equipment, soldiers and pilots heading toward the crowded skies of the Persian Gulf. What these planes don't have on board is a basic safety tool that's standard equipment in every passenger airliner in America and most passenger planes around the world. It's called TCAS, Traffic Collision Avoidance System. This is it. A computer that scans the skies, tells pilots when other planes are getting too close, and how to avoid crashing into them. It's kind of like a real-life video game. American Airlines pilot Dan Catania demonstrated it for us. And the little blue plane in the middle is you.
The little blue plane in the middle is us.
Oh, look. Tell us what those
are actually targets that the TCAS system is interrogating. This particular airplane is behind us now, 2,300 feet above us.
Let's just take a scenario. This plane is heading directly at you.
Okay.
What is TCAS? What happens?
It will tell you, it will give us an alert. It'll say, traffic, traffic. It will display the traffic on the display screen as a intruder or potential threat. It will tell you to do something, to resolve the conflict. It will tell you to climb or descend.
Increase climb. Increase climb.
Would you go so far as to say it's a necessity?
I would. From a safety standpoint, I absolutely say it's a necessity.
The FAA made it a necessity in 1988. After several grisly mid-air collisions, they required U.S. airlines to put TCAS in virtually every passenger plane. Since then, not a single TCAS-equipped plane has had a mid-air collision, and close calls have been cut in half.
TCAS system test okay.
So why don't military planes have TCAS, especially since they fly in dangerous parts of the world with weak or non-existent air traffic control systems?
The Air Force doesn't take safety as its primary priority for those who serve.
Monica Sindrich is a widow with a 3-year-old son. 5 months ago, her husband, Air Force Captain Greg Sindrich, was killed when the C-141 transport he was piloting collided head-on with a German plane off the coast of Africa. As far as you do know, what happened?
The German plane was flying at the wrong altitude. The air traffic controlling hadn't communicated with each other. So my husband was in the air for 59 minutes, and he was killed because the German plane came straight at him, and they just, like this.
Search teams found twisted wreckage floating in the ocean. 8 other American soldiers died with Greg Sindrich, and 24 people on the German plane were killed. Neither plane had TCAS.
TCAS would have given him the knowledge that he needed, that there's another plane coming straight at you.
If your husband's plane had had TCAS, would he be alive today?
Yes.
You have no doubt?
No doubts.
It's the closest I've ever come to death, for sure.
In October 1995, Rob Shore and his fellow Air Force pilot Jerry Ward were at the controls of a huge C-5 cargo plane flying 28,000 feet over Saudi Arabia.
I looked over, and out of my window was a KC-10, which is equivalent to a commercial DC-10.
You say, out my window.
Mm-hmm.
Out my window? You mean you just looked out and it was right there? How close was it?
Right there, close enough that I could see the co-pilot in the other airplane at 1,200 miles per hour closure rate. And he was looking at me and I was looking at him.
Were you actually heading toward each other?
Yes, head on.
But there were actually two planes coming head-on toward Rob's. One was a U.S. Air Force tanker like this one. The other was an F-16 fighter that had just finished a mid-air refueling.
We were either going to hit or we were going to miss. And Jerry took the airplane and made an evasive maneuver, and then it was all done. And we just looked at each other and speechless.
And you basically threaded the needle.
Threaded the needle.
How on earth did three U.S. Air Force planes end up at the same altitude and the same point in the sky at the same time?
Poor air traffic control system.
You were relying on the Saudi air traffic control system.
Right.
We're talking about the same airspace that our pilots are flying into right now, right? To get into.
Right now.
If U.S. planes had TCAS, this would not have happened?
No. We would have controlled the situation rather than the situation controlling us. And we would have gotten the warnings. We would have known the airplanes were out there.
When the C-5 returned to its base in Dover, Delaware, the pilots reported the incident to their chief safety officer, Lieutenant Colonel J. Lackland.
I listened to the story, and I started checking safety files, and suddenly the near midair started leaping out at me.
You found other cases of near misses?
Yes.
Lots? You remember?
There were enough that it got my attention.
You think there are more near misses than get reported?
Yes.
Lackland says military pilots worry they'll be blamed if they report incidents. But the more he investigated the near misses that were reported, the more firmly convinced he became. The Air Force had to put TCAS in its planes.
From my point of view, TCAS was one of those must-be-done items that for some reason was not.
For 2 years, Colonel Lackland campaigned for TCAS, sending memo after memo up the chain of command. This is your book of all the memos that you sent. You said, install TCAS as fast as possible. These are quotes. They'd send back something and you'd fire off another memo.
Sometimes they wouldn't send anything back.
Which made you, what, angrier?
Yes, which meant they got another letter.
This letter says the clock is ticking. Another even warns the generals of the worst questions they might face after a crash, like how come you had enough money for a golf course, but not enough for TCAS? After Commerce Secretary Ron Brown's plane slammed into a Bosnian mountain in 1996, the Pentagon did decide to upgrade safety features, and TCAS was on the list. But the money to actually install it never seemed to materialize. So Lackland kept firing off his memos. And this one you sent off on September 12th, 1997. I find this eerie because you said, when, not if, when we smack two airplanes together, there will be no excuse and there will be no explanation why we delayed TCAS purchase. And a few days later.
2 days.
2 days later.
Yeah.
What happened?
We got the message that a 141 was missing over the South Atlantic.
That missing C-141 was Greg Sindrich's.
Suddenly, people started listening now.
Now that there were bodies.
Yes. Suddenly, it seemed to click with everybody that we need TCAS.
I'm frustrated by it. I'm angry. I think it takes people to die before something happens, because on the priority list at the Pentagon, TCAS is 40-something on the list. My husband gets killed. His crew dies. It's number 2. How about that?
We went to the Pentagon to ask Air Force General Gregory Martin about TCAS. When the FAA mandated that all civilian passenger airplanes get TCAS, why didn't the military do exactly the same thing at that very point in time?
I think that's a good question. There is a risk assessment done. So when we take a look at the number of near-miss reports that are filed, and then take a look at the cost and time and pace of putting a new modification in versus what is deferred. We make that assessment based on what we think the likely implications are.
Translation? Back in 1988, the Air Force thought TCAS wasn't worth the cost. Now it thinks it is.
We believe that TCAS is very important. We have put a large amount of our resource into that program, but we can't do it in a knee-jerk, willy-nilly fashion.
Let's give it to the Air Force. They're going to install TCAS. They're going to do it. Well, they are. They're in the process of doing it.
Right.
Well, you have to give it to them, right?
No.
No. Why not?
Because they're doing it too slowly.
Even though it took U.S. airlines just 4 years to install TCAS on all their planes, the Pentagon says it'll take them twice as long with far fewer planes. Fighter jets are not candidates for TCAS. They're meant to fly close together. So far, only a handful of transports have been equipped. The system has been put in some planes.
Planes that fly VIPs and commanders. If you have enough rank on this shoulder, you get the luxury of safety.
She's right. Air Force One was the first to get TCAS. The workhorse transports will get it last. And most of the 141s, like Greg Sindrich flew, won't get TCAS at all. The Air Force thinks they're too close to retirement age to be worth the cost of installing it.
If we should be so unfortunate as to have one of those 141s, which is scheduled for the boneyard and therefore it's not cost effective to put one on, if that airplane creams a passenger airliner, you have no idea what expensive is. That is expensive.
Speaking of expensive, the Pentagon says it'll cost about $300,000 to put TCAS in each plane. But United Airlines did its entire fleet for $50,000 a plane. And consider the case of the C-17, the newest Air Force transport. It's in production now, and it's on the list to get TCAS, but they're not installing it yet. So my question is, why don't you put them in the assembly line?
You have to go to a production line to take a look at what goes into an airplane. When you see the cables being built, and now you're going to transform the workforce from putting a red cable next to a blue cable, this is not something you do overnight.
But General, you're making it sound as though we're talking about a system that's brand new and hasn't been used in the skies for a decade.
Once again, Leslie, we have to go back to the risk assessment. Is TCAS the most important thing in the United States Air Force for all of our aircraft? No. There are other things that are more important than TCAS in order for us to accomplish the mission that this nation expects of us.
The Air Force insists it has a good overall safety record and points to the thousands of flights that go off without a hitch every year. How do you feel about these young men and women flying planes into these areas without TCAS?
I do not sleep well at night knowing that we have airmen and other members of our armed forces on our aircraft going in harm's way, and that there are things out there that will, under certain circumstances, make it just a little safer. But in the end, the track record of 50 years of improved safety, the method we use in risk assessment has proven that we are making great progress in that area.
How worried are you about the Gulf situation right now?
As far as mid-air collisions?
Yes?
Throughout the entire fleet, I'm worried that, yes, I'm worried there or anywhere that there's another one coming.